So welcome everyone. I'm Shannon Dill. I'm with University of Maryland Extension and part of the Mid-Atlantic Women in Agriculture program. I'd like to welcome you to today's Wednesday webinar. We have these the second and fourth Wednesday of each month. And today we're going to be talking about ages and stages of financial wellness. We do have these scheduled through the entire 2022 year. So in 2 weeks, a very different topic, Calf Care 101. So variety of topics that you can tune into. That blue link there, go.umd.edu/women in ag webinars is where you can find our listing of information. And before we begin, just like to thank our sponsors of the program, as well as we have a number of collaborators as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I get to introduce Maria and Jesse. They're our speakers for today, and happy to have them here talking about the financial wellness programs and education. So Jesse and Maria, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. As she said, I'm Maria Pepitas. I'm with the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension. I'm a family and consumer science educator. I've been focusing on financial management education for most of my career, and I'm pleased to be here with you. And Jesse, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, Jesse Ketterman with University of Maryland Extension. I'm in the western part of Maryland, and my focus is on financial capability, financial literacy. I also work with health insurance literacy and farm stress. We've been doing a lot of programs around farm stress lately, and I'm an accredited financial counselor.
Great, thank you. So we wanted to really start off a little bit about, ages and stages of financial wellness, and really recognize and highlight, elevate, right, that over our lifetime, financial management, financial decision-making, those kinds of things really can change, right? There are some certain core skills that are important no matter how old you are. But over the lifetime, there are ages and stages. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And also a little bit about the differences between generations, because that can really be impactful in terms of, family dynamics, what you talk about, how you talk about them, and, how you're kind of learning about financial management. So on this slide, we kind of see what kind of culturally, at least in the United States, we have these kind of labels for depending on when you were born, right? And so across the generations, we've kind of labeled the names of the different generations. And so sort of right there in the middle of the screen, we see this, there's the silent generation, and they're typically between 1930 and early 1940s. The baby boomers are sort of, mid 1940s to mid 1960s. Then we have the Gen Xers. And so they're kind of in this really short time frame here, from late the 1960s into the 80s. And we have millennials and Gen Z. And now there's actually something called Alpha, right? Generation Alpha. So they're kind of the younger ones. But so it's kind of important to know which generation you are. And at least these are how they're labeled in the United States. Other countries may label them a little bit different, but each of these groups kind of has some characteristics in terms of their knowledge and what they know, and their money management habits. So one of the really important things to recognize is those early family environments, where we grow up in our families, are really imprint, right? What we learn from our parents really impacts us for the rest of our lives. So, you know, if they were really good at money management, then maybe you got to learn good money management habits. If they weren't so good, then maybe, you know, you don't have really good habits and you had to go out later in life and kind of learn how to do it yourself. And so that's really important to recognize. I think the other piece of it is if there were, you know, difficult times in your family when you're growing up, that may also impact the kinds of financial decision making that you make going forward. So, for example, I have a friend who grew up in a really financially impoverished situation, not a lot of money. Dad didn't work. Mom was a homemaker. And, you know, one of the impacts for her is she had to go to work really early in life. Like by age 10, she had a job and bringing home money. And that money actually went to pay for food for the family. And so that experience really has caused her to be a saver all her life, right? So that's just an example. And we all have examples like that based on our life circumstances. So we thought we'd kind of start out with a little fun activity that gets you to kind of figure out, well, what generation might you be, right? And so the next set of slides, there's about 6 or 7 of them. We're going to ask you to read the slide and then choose, right, the answer A, B, C, or D. And then depending on which letter you choose, you're going to give yourself those points, right? So you're going to keep track. You don't have to put it in the chat, just on a piece of paper, a little scrap paper. So if you choose A, you're going to give yourself 1 point. If you choose B, you're going to give yourself 2 points and proceed. So we're going to eventually add it up, and really the totals are going to help you know which generation you're in. So there's no right or wrong answer. All right, so let's get started on our first question. So what's your favorite TV show growing up? And you can see the answers: A, SpongeBob; B, French Prince of Bel-Air; C, Dukes of Hazzard; or Jeopardy. So if you picked SpongeBob, give yourself 1 point. Fresh Prince, 2 points. Dukes of Hazzard, 3, and Jeopardy, 4. And we're going to go through this kind of quickly because this is just supposed to be fun, right? So that's the first question. Here's the second question. What's your favorite video game? 1 point for Fortnite, 2 for Call of Duty, 3 for Pac-Man, and D, video games are the devil. All right, we're going to move on. Who's the greatest basketball player of all time? 1 point for Stephen Curry, 2 for LeBron James, 3 for Michael Jordan, and D for Larry Bird. Next question, what's your favorite pastime? 1 point for scrolling TikTok, 2 for complaining, 3 for watching television, and 4 for reading. Okay, next question. This is actually the last question. What's your favorite genre of music? Is it 1, rap; 2, pop; C, or 3, rock and roll; or 4, jazz? All right, so now add up your points. Let's see what we've got here. So based on your total, you can kind of see roughly which generation you may be from. And again, that kind of reinforces that notion of, you know, what were we introduced to as a young person, right? Those are the things that we're going to carry along with us and impact our decision making and, you know, in some cases, financial decision making. So I'm curious, you know, what have we got here in our group? Maybe you can just write in your generation, right? I know I'll admit I'm a baby boomer. I'm a young baby boomer, but I'm a baby boomer. You can just type it in the chat if you feel like sharing. That'd be great. All right, we've got some Gen Xers. Oh, we got lots of Gen Xers. All right. We've got a lot of Gen Xers. Well, that's cool. Glad you're here. Thanks for sharing. So the next part of our presentation is a little bit about kind of some of the differences between the generations, right? And so one of the things that I think that really stands out in that little activity is really, what are some of those experiences? What was part of our culture during the time we grew up, and what really impacts us? And there's some studies that kind of say, what happens when we're kind of in that teen time into our mid-20s really kind of holds us, right? And we tend to bring those things forward. So that can relate to pastimes and music and all those sort of those questions that we just answered. But I'd like to shift and just kind of think about, what were some of the products and services, the financial products and services that you remember that, maybe your children or your grandparents have never used or heard of. So think about like what you know and what you use. And then what are some of those things that your children are clueless about and maybe your grandparents are clueless about? And let's just focus on the financial services, products and services. And, write them in the chat if you have ideas. So for example, I grew up in a time when the phone was still attached to the wall. And so that was something that my parents and grandparents never knew of a cell phone, right? And I'm of that age where I got to adapt and move to that. I also of an age from when it comes to financial products, right? I've had a checking account and I, do banking online. My mother, my grandparents, they never did banking online. I know that my grandfather, for example, early in the 1930s, actually 1940s, is when insurance became something that was available to most consumers. And there was a huge educational campaign that happened around life insurance and health insurance. But before that, you were self-insured and you relied on your family, right? And so now we have insurance for everything. So those are just some examples. Let's see what's in the chat, right? Cell phones, right? Were a big thing in the car, right? Carried in the in a big case in the car. Yeah, I think I used one of those ones. Online banking. Thanks, Michael. That's a great example. Cassette tapes, right? 8 tracks. Like I remember an 8-track. I'm really showing my age. So those are just some of the examples, but I think it's important. The reason behind this idea of kind of sharing those things is because, as we're interacting with older generations, as we're interacting with younger generations, our experiences are going to influence what we share, right? What we teach our children, how we coach our parents as they age. And so all of that is important to kind of recognize that they're coming from a totally different place in some cases. So what are some of those generational personal finance practices that might be a little bit different, right? And so this slide kind of focuses on saving, right? And one of the things that we know is millennials are really about saving. They're really about kind of financial freedom and are interested in using their savings for long-term planning, and freedom, right? And are really into experiences as opposed to stuff, right? And so you can kind of see that in this first chart here. Whereas you can see later generations are really saving for retirement, right? So that's one of the differences across the generations. Here's another one that has to do with kind of being cashless, meaning, you know, hey, I'm comfortable not carrying around cash in my wallet, right? And so you can see the 18 to 29-year-olds are perfectly happy just running around with a debit card or a credit card in their pocket, whereas other ages feel more confident and comfortable if they have a little money in their wallet. This next one has to do with spending habits and where the different generations spend their money. And I think one of the things that really stands out is sort of the housing, right? How much people are spending on housing. So for example, those Gen Xers, right? They're spending a lot on housing. Whereas say, if you look at food at home, right? The Generation X is also spending a lot of money for food at home. That's that pink stripe. Eating out, right? Those Gen Xers, they're also eating out, right? But then compare that to the greatest generation or the silent generation, they're the older ones, right? So again, a lot of it has to do with values and how they were brought up and what skills they have. But it's interesting to kind of recognize those differences, right? Okay, the next one has to do with payment behavior. Like, how are people paying their bills? And again, we can see that our older generations are very comfortable using cash, whereas our younger ones are using debit cards. They might be using credit cards, electronic tools. And our really young ones, right, they're using other things. They're probably, you know, PayPal and other kinds of tools online that are helping them pay their expenses. I think another really interesting piece is trends in housing. I have a friend who has a 30-something daughter who has recently returned home. And I said to her, you know, it's okay. That's what's trending, right? And so look at this. We can see that 13% of 30 to 34-year-olds are actually living with their parents. 25%, 1/4 of our population between the ages of 25 and 29 are living with their parents. And of course, we would think that these younger ages are still living with their parents because they haven't quite launched yet. That's what I call it, launching, right? But this down here, right? We almost have, what is that, 30, almost 40% of young people, 25 to 34, living with their parents. And a lot of that has to do with expenses, right? How expensive housing is. It has to do with the job market. It has to do with their comfort level and being able to be out on their own and living on their own. And so I think that that's a really important trend to pay attention to because, you know, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, right, in 1980, it was a lot lower. And that was the expectation. So when we kind of think about the generational differences, there's sort of important characteristics that I've kind of alluded to, and some of the key kind of relevant financial concepts that they need to be addressing. And so we can see our older generations, you know, they tend to be, you know, in a different place in their life, right? Some of them are retired already. Some of them are, you know, working towards retirement. They're worried about health. They may be in a place where they can spend more freely, but they've had a kind of a strong work ethic. They have worked to delay reward, meaning they're saving, and so now they're going to have fun, right? Where our baby boomers may be working in creative and independent manner. Maybe they've left their job and are working part-time, doing kind of some of the things that are going to bring them personal gratification and balancing that with health and wealth, but they're not health and wellness, but they're not done working, right? So where are they in their financial life stage? Obviously, they're record keeping, they're managing risk through insurances, they're thinking about estate planning and how much it's going to cost as they age, and getting those estate plans in order. And notice here this last one, protecting against scams and identity theft. And this is the big population that really gets scammed, and so they've got to be on the lookout. So what about Gen X and millennials, right? So these two groups are a bit different, right? Gen Xers are, fiercely self-reliant. They want feedback. They're adaptable. They kind of like informal. They're very technologically capable. They've spent a lot of time on technology. They may not be really great at talking and interpersonal skills. And they want to know why, right? They want to know why they have to do something. Millennials, on the other hand, are a little bit more social through social media, but they're social, and they can multitask. They're comfortable with like jumping in and doing things and learning that way. They're motivated by money and earning potential, goal-oriented, and certainly experienced with technology. So where are they, right, in their life stage around relevant concepts, financial concepts? So decision-making, right, spending and creating savings plans, using credit wisely, managing their debt wisely, really looking into those saving for retirement and for investing, and then again, protecting against scams and theft and identity theft. And then what about our youngest people? Well, obviously their tasks are very similar, and Jess is going to spend a little bit more time getting specific on the different generations. So very, very similar in terms of the umbrella tasks as the Gen Xers and the millennials, but they're in a different stage, right? They're in a different place. So, excuse me, Gen Zs are active consumers. They have a high influence over their parent purchases, right? So, hey, mom and dad, can you help us? And remember, these folks may be living at home, right? So they're impacting parent decisions over money, even when they're in their 20s, right? Or yeah. So let's see. They're a very diverse generation. They tend to be educated. They do a lot of purchasing online. And then we have our alphas, right? So again, there's lots of career opportunities for those alphas, especially as us baby boomers and the great generation die off, right? There's lots of openings that are happening. And they're a very diverse generation too. Both these generations tend to be really open to diversity and accepting differences in others. They are educated. They like to keep up with the Joneses. They have become economically savvy, right? In contrast to their Gen Y parents. They are influenced by what's happening globally and, are invested in social issues as well as economic issues. And they tend to be more urban. So that's our overview of the different generations. And so this last slide for me has to do with, what's the individual's financial life cycle. And so this is a nice chart that really kind of outlines, where people are generally in terms of their age and their life situation, right? They might be single or married or starting a family, and approaching retirement years versus retirement years. And then, here are kind of those financial key pieces, right? Basic wealth protection, wealth building, saving, learning about consumer decision making, learning about credit, learning about, and accumulating their assets, right? And in this stage, right, where income has started to go up a little bit, they're also focusing on wealth accumulation and managing that. And then obviously when we get into stage 3 and we're in our retirement years, we're starting to, use the money that we've saved, maybe change the kinds of assets that we have, where we live, what's in our savings account, how we're investing, those kinds of things. So all of that, there's a lot to know, right? In order to feel comfortable and confident across the life cycle when it comes to finances. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Jesse.
Well, thank you, Maria. And now we're going to start looking at this in terms of generational personal finance action steps. And basically, we're breaking these into groups, and we're going to look at financial tasks as well as milestones. So the first group is financial task birth to 19. And so these are some tasks that you need to think about when you're in this kind of age range, right? You need to learn to save for something you want. That's a good skill to develop early on, is learning how to save. Distinguishing between wants and needs. It's interesting when I teach wants and needs, I talk about how I still have to deal with that concept of wants and needs even today. It's important to develop a good work ethic. You start wanting to explore career options, develop appropriate financial values. You want to start developing some personal responsibility and personal discipline, right? Those are important things to do in this area. Of course, you're going to get that first part-time job. And so you're going to start earning money, and then you got to start thinking about what you're going to do with that money. When you start working, you're going to have to file income taxes and use banking services. So that and savings accounts, all 4 of those items kind of go together. And then you got to start learning how to make a spending plan. How are you going to use that money that you're making? So when it comes to milestones, of course, you're gonna have that job, that first job, and you're gonna have that income. Then now that you have this income, you're gonna start to
Looks like Jesse froze.
Wasn't sure whether it was me or him.
No, I think it's him.
Okay.
Shannon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, my connections. Am I back?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. But anyway, so we were talking about milestones, birth to 19. We talked about getting that first job and having that first income. Getting that first paycheck is definitely one of those exciting things. In the process of that, sometimes you determine what you like to do or what you don't like to do in that first job. And then start thinking about, what you might want to do in terms of a vocation and making career plans. It's a good point to start that savings account and get in the habit of setting money aside for savings, learning about setting financial goals. And when we talk about financial goals, we're talking about SMART goals. If you haven't heard of that concept, specific goals, measurable goals, achievable and attainable goals, realistic goals, and having being time oriented with those goals. And then you also need to learn to be a comparison shopper. And one of those interesting things about the comparison shopper, my son, he's in his first year at community college, and he has his first job, and he's making money, and he's starting to spend his money, you know, on gas and food. But he's kind of learned that, you know, yeah, I can't really eat at the campus dining facility all the time, because that's kind of a little more expensive than going and getting me like a Happy Meal or something, or a smaller meal at McDonald's. So it's interesting to see him go through those milestones as he works through his first job. So now we're talking about, we switched over from the 19s into the 20s, and you really start to, at some point in the 20s, and it's going to be a little different for everyone as to when this happens, but you need to start to learn how to invest. Sometimes your first professional job will kind of have some retirement type options there, and so you need to start to learn about them and take advantage of them. Learning to budget. You know, you learn a little bit more about different financial services, so different types of checking accounts, banks versus credit unions. You start to learn about insurance and the different deductibles that go with insurance. Of course, we talked about the importance of starting that retirement savings plan. If you went to school and took out loans, you know, after you graduate, you have to start paying those loans back. Building a good credit history. So we know that your credit history is going to kind of determine the interest rates you get on loans or when you borrow money. Some people do start this with their first job, or you know, when they're 18, they get their first credit card just to establish good credit history. But it's definitely something you need to do in your 20s. You need to start thinking about that emergency fund. You know, when we talk about emergency fund, you want to be able to cover, you know, at least 3 months of your expenses, but it takes time to build up to that point. And so, you know, start with a small goal. This one was 1,200 here. If you think that's kind of too big, start with 500, and then work your way up to 1,000, and then work your way up to 3 months worth of expenses. And then you also need to start thinking about your health. And the best way to take care of your health is to have health insurance, and that minimizes your costs should something happen to you. So those milestones, when you get to age, or in that age 20, you know, assessing what your financial needs are, start thinking about your long-term and short-term goals. What does your financial situation look like? You know, where would you be comfortable in terms of what your income would be, right? Sometimes we have interest in careers, and then you look into that career a little bit and you say, well, financially, I'm not going to be able to live in that career. Maybe I need to explore other options there. Balancing your spending, borrowing, and savings, opening that retirement account, getting a credit card, and establishing good credit. And, you know, we're not going to encourage anyone to have several credit cards. Try to get one or two and manage them, and then hold on to them for a while. That's how you improve your credit score. And then start to organize your financial and legal records, and, you know, start to seek professional advice, especially when it comes to retirement planning. Now we're transitioning into our 30s, and so with your task into your 30s, you know, you want to start saving as much as you possibly can for your retirement. You want to start saving for, if you haven't already done so, to buy a house. So that includes, you know, setting aside money to have money to put a down payment on your house. You know, develop your expertise in investing. So again, you just don't want to rely on somebody else. You want to kind of increase your knowledge in that area. Make sure those investments are diversified. You want to boost your job skills. And then you also need to start thinking about estate planning, things like wills and things like that. If you have children, then you can start thinking about setting up an investment accounts for children. And then when you talk about within our farming population, you need to start thinking about succession planning and transition planning. So what does it look like as the parents get into that retirement age, and are the younger individuals going to transition into the farm, and what does that mean, and how does that look? So now we're over those milestones. At that point, you should be financially independent from parents. You know, if you do a traditional 10-year repayment plan, you should be pretty close to paying that off in your 30s. Now, you know, there are several other repayment options, so that may not be the case depending upon what your situation is. But if you're on that standard repayment plan, you should be close. You know, you want to, so when you look at your salary at this point in the 30s, you want to think, okay, have I saved a half a year's worth of salary for retirement? We talked about credit score, so you want to make sure that your credit score and your credit history is going to get you the best interest rates possible. And then having your regular savings and investing and at least 3 to 6 months of income set aside for emergencies, making sure that you have the education you need to move ahead in your career field, and again, making sure that you have those estate planning documents and life insurance. Especially, you know, you get life insurance as you start to have kids, you need to make sure that you have that money insured or have your life insurance, so that should something happen to you, your family is going to be able to maintain that current lifestyle that you live. Now we're moving into our 40s. In 40s, you know, you're going to start thinking about, how do I max out those retirement savings? If you haven't started working with a financial advisor, it's a good time to start working with one. You know, reassessing your insurance, making sure that your insurance is meeting your current needs and your current situations. And again, when we talk about that emergency savings, you know, do you have enough to cover your expenses for at least 3 months? Keep those, you know, I think you're going to see this throughout, you know, you always need to keep those estate planning documents up to date. Sometimes things change, you know, your beneficiaries at one point may have been your parents. Now, you know, if you get married, it's going to be your spouse. And then you also have the, if you have children, and so you have to keep those documents up to date. And then, you know, when you're in your 40s, you also need to start talking to your parents about their finances, and do they have what they need, and how are things going to transition with their estate as well. So back to those milestones: 2 times your annual salary saved for retirement. Another way to look at it is making sure that you're saving at least 10% of your gross income. And again, 10% is on the minimum side, 15% is better. Making sure that you have some money saved aside for college for your children, that you continue to expand your knowledge and expertise of investing and managing your portfolios, and make sure that portfolios diversified. Continuing to improve your skill set so that you are employable and that you're moving up the ladder. Reassessing that insurance, and then always thinking about career advancement. Now we're in that area where I just turned 50 this year, and so I need to ramp up savings in peak earning years. I need to start thinking about how much money I'm going to need to live on after I leave my job, making sure that my debts are paid off. And again, I'm going to be hitting that phase where I'll be paying off my mortgage. And so what am I going to do with that money? Think about living arrangements, you know, so what does my next step look like in terms of living? And then you also need to start learning about Social Security, your retirement savings plans, long-term care costs, those kind of things. And then again, if you're a farmer, you really need to start developing a solid transition plan there. Milestones that you want to hit, you know, you do want to have by this point saved 4 to 6 times your annual salary. You also hit that age where you can start doing some catch-up retirement savings, so you can increase the amount you're putting towards retirement. continuing to learn about Social Security, Medicare, retirement benefits through work. That includes, what healthcare options may be available through work and how that transitions into retirement. Increased knowledge of aging parents' finances. So yeah, you do need to start asking your parents about, okay, what are these things I need to know? Because, unfortunately, you're not going to be around forever. So we need to start planning, and I need to be aware of what I need to be aware of should something happen to you. Again, consulting with financial advisors along the way, and continuing with your insurance and your career. Now we're turning 60. So, at some point in your 60s, you're going to start collecting Social Security. This is when you can start to take advantage of those senior discounts and meals that are out there. You need to make sure, if you haven't done so already, purchase long-term care insurance. That's to protect your finances should you end up needing long-term care. Making sure you know and understand Medicare, and then also, those retirement savings accounts, you need to start drawing on them when you're 70 and a half. And that we're still in that little, what I call that gray area right now with COVID. They put some exceptions in for when you need to draw, but the general rule of thumb is 70 and a half. Get more strategic about charitable giving. So, you've transitioned now, your kids are out on their own. So you typically have a little extra income. And so where do you want that money to go? So you may do some more charitable giving, and prepare yourself psychologically for the withdrawal and spend phase of your life, right? So you've been saving all this time, and now you're hitting that point where, okay, you're not going to be saving, you're going to be using that money. And what does that mean? And do you have a plan for how that plays out so that you have enough throughout the remainder of your life? So where should you be? What are those milestones? 6 to 10 times your annual salary. Your mortgage should be paid off, or in your home equity line. You want to get those credit card debts paid off. Catch up on retirement strategies, and some things to think about. Again, will you be downsizing from the current house that you have? Will you be moving to a different location? Will you work full-time longer, or will you work part-time? And what does that mean? And how does that impact your Social Security? And at some point, do you begin selling your assets, right? And then, when you do retire, you got to think about, man, what am I going to do? You've been working your whole life. And so what are you going to do with your time in retirement? So some people, it's, again, a volunteering. Some people, it's a second part-time job. Making sure you're meeting regularly with financial advisors, looking at your net worth, and then, again, continuing with that insurance and how your insurance may change over time as you get older. And so now we have these key takeaways. And of course, the biggest one is start saving and planning early. The sooner you can start saving, the sooner you have a good solid plan. It makes these stages much easier to work through and transition into. So being financially resilient means being able to withstand and recover from temporary financial hardships and disruptions. So again, that's going back to that emergency savings plan. Depending upon what stage you're at, talk to others about your financial situation. That's one of those conversations people don't like to have. But the more you learn, the better equipped you are to deal with these situations. I always remember talking to my cousin after I graduated from college, and I thought, our parents really never talked to us about finances. They just made sure that they provided for us. And so, one of the places that you're going to learn about finances is your parents. So making sure that you open the doors for those conversations. And then, of course, life happens, right? And so making sure that you have contingency plans and then documents to make that contingency plan play out. So here's another key takeaway: don't impose your social clock on other people. So we all have different beliefs and values when it comes to money. We all have different views on what those things mean. And so it gives us a couple examples here. In your late 20s and 30s, generationally, people look at these things differently. So asking someone, when are you two going to have a baby? Maybe that's their plan is different than what you think it should be. And the same with retirement. I know people that have worked into full-time into their mid 70s, even 80s, so that retirement decision is going to be different for everyone. And then there's another one: are you still working and why? So again, those are things to be cautious of. Another one: we're all in different stages of life and history. So, the earlier you can start working with your kids and teaching them about money, those are important things. And it's a great way to engage in conversations with those teenagers when learning about money. You always be willing to learn and ask questions, and then make sure that when you are seeking help, that there's trusted individuals and professionals that you should be reaching out to, just to make sure that you're getting good, solid advice. And so that kind of wraps up our presentation. I hope that Maria and I hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and we welcome any comments in the chat box that you may have. If you wanted to contact us individually, you can see our email address up there on the screen. And yes, thank you. We enjoyed you joining us today.
Any questions? We'd be happy to entertain them. I think, from a farm audience perspective, one of the key things for me is, especially if it's a farm family and they're together already, kind of sharing not just, like the business plan or the financial plans with your children is important, because that's a big part of a successful farm business. It's not just about the growing, right? It's in the marketing and the packaging and getting it off the farm. It's cultivating the next generation to be able to take over, and money is a big part of that. And in our culture, it's taboo to talk about money. But think about not so much about the bottom line. Although the figures are helpful, but the skills, right? What are you doing in order to be successful, right? How are you documenting things? How have you developed your plan, your business plan? And the same goes with households, right? I don't have to tell my kids how much money I make, but I can tell them the money that does come in, hey, 30% of it goes to housing. And, hey, I spend $700 a month on food, right? And helping them translate, well, what does that mean, right? Oh, well, you have a $15 an hour job, right? That means X number of hours that you need to be working. And then they, of course, pull their hair out and go, really? Yeah. Well, why do you think I'm never home, right? I mean, those are the kinds of conversations that you can have and help them understand the way the world works. And, in your 20s, or when your kids are in their 20s, helping them understand how much is housing, what goes into housing, how do you fix things that break, where does the money come from? All of those things are important things to share. So And, you know, and then as we get older, because I was kind of doing the numbers, if a lot of our folks are Gen Xers, you may be in that place where you're taking care of kids and taking care of parents. And so, you know, helping, kind of having conversations with the parents about, you know, how are things going? Are you able to pay your bills on time? Hey, did you remember to pay your taxes? Right. I kind of had that conversation with my 82-year-old mom the other day. How are the taxes coming along, Mom? You need any help? Right. So it's that kind of stuff that keeps families together and tight. And the more you know, the easier it is. My parting words of wisdom. Any questions in the chat? We must have covered it all.
It's great, Maria and Jesse. I think that was very good information and advice. And I think that as a Gen Xer struggling with kids and teens and preteens, it's trying to figure that out. And, you know, how do you relay that understanding and really taking time to enlighten them on what's happening. Yes.
So I will admit that when I did my thesis way back when, I actually looked at how do kids learn about money. And the big thing was giving them activities and responsibility. So if they have a dog, then they're in charge of taking care of the dog and, you know, coming with you when you go to get the feed, right? If they have a job, then helping them set up an account and asking them to put money into a savings account every time they have, you know, some portion, right? So it's those kinds of activities that really help build knowledge and responsibility and understanding of the financial systems that are out there that can be kind of complex. So good luck. You can always ask Jesse. His kids are a little older. He's been through it.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording at this point.